The Prix Galien is a welcome initiative to stimulate creative research and promote excellence. Barack Obama. The Galien Awards ceremony is considered the equivalent of the Oscars night for the innovators in the labs and awards every year the best pharmaceutical product, the best biotechnology product, the best medical technology, and the best digital health product.
This is the right event, on the right issue, at the right time.
I thank His Excellency, the President, for bringing Prix Galien to Africa, and I look forward to the day when we will celebrate an African winner of the Prix Galien.
I'm particularly grateful to receive this award.
The awards are among the highest honors in science and commerce because they lead to improvement in the human condition.
The Prix Galien Awards recognize the world's brightest minds and most innovative companies. They are a true celebration of the hard work required to produce life-changing interventions.
That is what makes us optimistic about the future.
Congratulations to all of you.
Make a difference. Join the Galien Foundation. The Galien Week of Innovation has been made possible thanks to our precious friends and partners who share the Galien Foundation's values. First off, the two exclusive platinum partners are We would now like to acknowledge our two gold partners. Furthermore, we proudly introduce our corporate leaders partners. The associate partners are the grantors are To conclude, we are extremely fortunate to work with outstanding media partners who have contributed to the Galien Foundation's renown.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Gil Bash from the Galien Foundation. I'm your host and moderator for today's session. We have some outstanding speakers, panelists joining us today who are dealing with some of the cutting-edge issues of health around the world. I want to begin by thanking the Foundation and our jurors. We receive hundreds of submissions to be evaluated for the Prix Galien. The Prix Galien is known by many as, in fact, the Nobel Prize of Life Science Innovation. And obviously it's for a very good reason. Many of our jurors are in fact Nobel laureates themselves, and they're joined by some of the most outstanding leaders around the world in the life science sector. People who have really been at the bench of inventing medicines that are sustaining and saving millions of lives. They've invested mightily in innovation that can sustain and save people. They are from around the world, and they are dedicated to advancing scientists and their sponsors so that they can sustain us. So a thanks, of course, to our jurors. I also want to extend a very special thanks to the chair of the Galien Foundation, the person who really had the courage and vision to bring it to the United States from Europe, Bruno Cohen, and many people who are attending the forum tomorrow, which is held at the Alexandria Life Sciences Center. And then later on in the evening, the celebratory gala for all of our honorees at the Museum of Natural History. We'll have the opportunity to meet our chair, Bruno Cohen. And I also want to thank the staff of the foundation. It is their dedication and diligence that makes these programs possible. Throughout the week, And tomorrow, we're obviously hearing from some of the smartest people in the area of science. So this is a critical aspect. Their work is extraordinary. And to start us off, before I introduce our panelists, I want to involve our participants in a poll. Could I ask the staff to put the poll up, please, on screen? I've just been told that the poll is not going to happen today, and I want to thank them, though, for putting together the poll. I hope we get to hear the answer to the poll at some point. I did see it beforehand, and the poll is dealing with some of the critical issues that we're facing. And I will just give a sneak peek. I was on one panel, and apparently health information and digital technology to improve the system on the panel that I was participating in a few days ago was clearly the front runner. I don't know how it worked out. We'll have to find out. With that, let's return to my introduction of the panelists, and then we're going to go right into the session. We have 4 leaders, and let me just say these, 5 leaders, and let me just say that all of them are in fact Galien nominees. We have from the foundations, Zev Shiro. I don't know, Zev, if you'll be participating in the conversation, but it's good to see you. I want to acknowledge you as one of our foundation advisory board members, and thank you so much for your front row seat in this conversation. Let me start, and I'll be introducing people in alphabetical order by last name. All of them are honorees. All of them deserve our recognition. Just say that to be an honoree alone is extraordinary. So let me start with Dr. Dennis Ruby. Dr. Ruby is the Chief Science Officer at SIGA Technologies. Dr. Ruby, thank you so much for joining us. I'll move on to Dr. Anu Ashinusi. Is that correct, Dr. Ashinusi? You know, it's a Nigerian last name, and I'll be practicing it vigilantly so that when I see you tomorrow, I'll have it perfect. I also want to acknowledge Jim Saylor. Jim, by the way, is an expert in public policy. He received his MPP, his Master's in Public Policy, from the Kennedy School, one of the great schools on the topic. And joining us from Australia, Professor Mark Sullivan, who is the founder and managing director of Medicines for Development for Global Health. By the way, Jim is the executive director for the Center of Biomedical Research at the Population Council. They're doing work around the world. And Dr. Ashinusi is the vice president of clinical research for hepatitis, respiratory and emerging viruses. Obviously, COVID, I imagine, being on your front burner from Gilead Sciences. Thank you for joining us. I want to acknowledge your companies. And I want to start with just letting our audience know why you are award nominees. And Dennis, if you would please start us off and share a little bit about what you and the company are doing so we can have greater appreciation of your contributions.
Thank you, Gil. I've been privileged to lead SIGA's R&D efforts for the past 25 years, and we have been interested in developing countermeasures for infectious disease agents, whether they are deliberately introduced or come out of nature. And of particular interest, we have been working and have developed an antiviral drug for smallpox, which never existed before. And as you might imagine, developing a drug for a disease that doesn't exist posed a tremendous challenge. And it took over 20 years of a private-public partnership to bring this project to fruition. We now have an approved drug. It's stockpiled so that if smallpox or related virus were to come out of nature, much like COVID-19 did, we would be prepared. And I've been very privileged to be a part of that effort.
Thank you, Dennis, so much for that. And you know, I think that we're going to get into conversation because COVID really, I think, alerts us to all sorts of diseases that we think are behind us, like measles, like polio, like smallpox. And we obviously have to be vigilant. We're going to be exploring whether we're ready for the next public health challenge, whatever that challenge might be. Anu, I know that you and your colleagues have been vigilant and working on many different treatments for diseases, whether it be hepatitis, whether it be perhaps in the area of COVID and others. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing and why Gilead Sciences has been selected as a finalist.
Yeah, thank you, Gil. And first of all, I'd like to thank the Galien Foundation for inviting me to be part of this webinar. And I look forward to an exciting conversation with you and my fellow panelists today. So as you mentioned earlier, at Gilead, I oversee our hepatitis, respiratory and emerging virus portfolio, including our efforts in COVID-19. So by my background is really I'm an infectious disease physician and clinical researcher by training. And my career has largely been focused on developing transformational therapies against life-threatening diseases. So my team and I were responsible for evaluating and developing Veklury, which is also known as remdesivir, for a treatment for COVID-19 last year. As you know, I think as Dennis alluded to, was extremely challenging. Clearly developing a drug in the middle of an unprecedented pandemic for a newly identified disease is very complicated. But we were able to do this. And today, Veklury is approved and authorized in more than 50 countries, where it's now the antiviral standard of care for the treatment of COVID-19 in hospitalized patients. And we're incredibly humbled at Gilead to have been able to be part of this story to make a difference. And since the beginning of the pandemic, actually, more than 7 million patients have received remdesivir or Veklury or the generic form, and 5 million of those are actually in the low and middle income countries. So that's something we're very proud of. And so I'm very passionate about advancing science and innovation. And so I look forward to the conversation we're going to have here today about how best we can achieve that goal.
Thank you very much. I think that this is very much a global panel. And so I think we're going to be exploring not just the challenges that we face in the United States, but I've always believed that disease is a global concern. Disease, or particularly viral diseases or pandemic, whether it be non-communicable disease or communicable disease, doesn't really recognize borders. And I think we have to start to recognize that. So I'll be curious to hear your thoughts on that. Jim, you and the Population Council have taken on a vast challenge that affects the entire world all the time. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what you're doing and what the Population Council is doing. How did you get to be a Galien finalist?
Thank you so much, Gil. It's a pleasure to be here with such a distinguished panel. My name is Jim Saylor, and I'm the Executive Director for the Center for Biomedical Research at the Population Council. The Pop Council was founded in 1952 by John D. Rockefeller III with a mission to help achieve a sustainable and equitable balance of people and resources on the planet. Not long after founding the council, Rockefeller also founded the Center for Biomedical Research, part of the Pop Council, with a goal to develop family planning technologies, contraceptive technologies, so that women and men could control their own fertility. Over the years, the Pop Council has developed, tested, registered, and introduced a wide number of long-acting reversible contraceptives like Mirena and the copper T IUD and Norplant and Jadel. And we're very privileged to be honored by the Galien Foundation as a nominee for our development of the latest, our latest product, which is called Antiviral. And Antiviral is a 1-year contraceptive vaginal ring. It's the first long-lasting contraceptive product that's fully under the control of women to insert and remove and use as they wish. And this is a critical issue, not just in the United States, where people like to have control over their own fertility and their own health, but also if you think around the world, where even with some of the great long-acting products that are available, there's a lack of health personnel to actually insert and remove IUDs or insert and remove implants. And so having a technology that women can use themselves that lasts a full year long is actually an important advance. And of course, we didn't know this as we were developing it, but in the era of COVID, with a lot more telemedicine and more distance sometimes between a provider and the recipient, this becomes even more critical. So Antiviral is available now in the United States, and we're looking forward to making it available all around the world, like places we have offices like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Kenya, and many, many other countries around the world. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And again, congratulations to you. And Mark, first of all, I want to acknowledge you're calling in from Australia. It's the middle of the night. It's obviously is an important event. And I want to acknowledge you and obviously medicines development, the work you're doing, because clearly the nature of this panel speaks to the global import of the topic we're going to be discussing. Mark, could you talk a little bit about yourself and what you and the enterprise are doing to improve global health and why you were able to become a Galien finalist?
Thanks, Gil. Thanks for the introduction. And yeah, it's just the sun is just beginning to come up behind me, so it's not quite the middle of the night. I have that benefit of enjoying the morning.
Okay,
so,
sunrise.
Sunrise, just happening. So yeah, really lovely to be here. A wonderful opportunity to have this conversation with the audience and with you all. So thank you for that. I'm really grateful. Medicines Development is an organization that develops drugs for particularly diseases of low middle income countries. Our focus is on neglected tropical diseases, generally infectious diseases. And so we've been working on the development of a new treatment for river blindness, which is a condition endemic in sub-Saharan Africa, and also potentially looking at other areas such as lymphatic filariasis and a group of other genuinely neglected diseases. These are diseases that affect people who cannot afford to pay for their medicines and yet are potentially very tractable diseases to treatment. And my background is as a clinical researcher. I was at Gilead in California for a few years, and before that at GSK in London. So I've seen the impact of the work that medicines can have, and how they change lives, how they improve lives, and it's an incredibly motivating and rewarding thing to see and to achieve. And so I've just taken that into a new area of diseases where they're generally neglected. So we're working on 8 different neglected diseases with 2 medicines. The reason that we're here today is because of the drug moxidectin, which is a second generation form of ivermectin, and the second in the class of macrocyclic lactones to be approved for human use after ivermectin, which I think we all know ivermectin is one of the most impactful and wonderful medicines in history, and we're following in some pretty big shoes there.
I know, I just want to say, Mark, I was, I'll date myself, but I was involved with Dr. Vagelos and decision to donate ivermectin and work with President Carter in its distribution against onchocerciasis, river blindness in Africa. And I think that each of you, in terms of your evolutionary work, really speak to the sense of sort of yesterday's achievements, science moves on. And I want to move right into the panel conversation about this right now, and explore a little bit of your company's expertise. What I'm noticing from the days where we talked about the origins of ivermectin or the copper T IUD Paragard, Jim, I think you're referring to, that was the Population Council and Pharma, I think it was, brought into market. It was a very bold move after the Dalcon Shield. It was a historic, courageous move. Each of you have done something extraordinary to invent a treatment for smallpox when we believe smallpox is eradicated, understanding that we must be vigilant, and to understand that antivirals are something we always need to keep our research at hand. So my first question is sort of addressing the need when we think the market's need is addressed, and then we say, no, it's being satisfied now. This is not a marketing issue. This is an issue that we actually need to advance the therapy or the treatment or the approach that we're currently taking, because the past approach actually will not be working for people around the world, will not be working for people in developed nations, will not be working for people who have an economic viability. So Dennis, I wanted to start off with you, drawing on your experience with smallpox, and then Anu, if you don't mind being prepared to jump in. I wanted to ask the question about when you're looking at the environment and you're saying, well, there is something that fills the gap right now. Perhaps it's the absence of disease, or perhaps it's a therapy that's working okay. What inspired you and your colleagues to say, we need a treatment for smallpox, or we need an antiviral that can address the upcoming pandemic? Dennis, first to you.
Well, first of all, there was no market for smallpox antiviral. However, the federal government after 9/11 took a look at all the infectious agents that could be used as bioweapons. And one of the first ones that got a material threat assessment was smallpox. The smallpox has not been eradicated from the earth in the sense that it exists in several laboratories. It also could be recreated by synthetic biology. So recognizing this threat, the federal government actually subsidized they made the market, if you will. They funded the R&D activities over 15 years, and they ensured that the drug would in fact be purchased and put in the stockpile, thereby creating a market. So certainly for the type of agents we're talking about, hantavirus, smallpox, COVID, federal government will have to help create those markets if the early stage research and development is to be successful.
That's really critical comment, Dennis. And I know that anthrax has been one of those approaches as well, the importance of stockpiling treatment for anthrax or vaccines for anthrax. So, you've just mentioned the importance of partnership with the federal government and recognizing that we have to see risk on the horizon. Anu, I wanted to get your perspective on this, because obviously you and Gilead Sciences you have a very deep research pipeline in terms of antivirals. You're looking sort of forward thinking. What's your approach in thinking, and how do you pivot from what Dennis just shared?
Yeah, no, thanks, Gil. And first I'd like to apologize for this blue light. I'm in this conference room that magically just switched to a blue light that I'm not really sure how to get rid of. But Dennis made a really good point. I think with the example with the agent that his company is working on, which is smallpox. And I would pivot. I'm an infectious disease physician, and I would pivot to, it was a similar situation with COVID, right? In December of 2019, no one knew there was going to be this new coronavirus that was going to cause this global pandemic. And I think that just speaks to, the need for pandemic preparedness. It's not going to be like, when is, if we're ever going to have a next pandemic, it's like when and what will that pandemic be, which then speaks to why we always have to be, ensuring that we're prepared for the next thing on the horizon. And I'll say, also in line with what Dennis was sharing, like, I think it's very important when we think about what we've been able to do here at Gilead Sciences, like the importance of like public-private partnerships, but also recognizing that you have to be very focused on the science and driven by patient needs, which will evolve as new things happen. And so the reason we were able to be, successful, I think, very rapidly with developing remdesivir or Veklury as the first antiviral for COVID was really because we've been in that space for 30 years, 3 decades, yeah. And really making the commitment to emerging viruses several years ago, recognizing that we're uniquely positioned with antiviral expertise to be able to address the significant unmet needs which still remain. And so I think those public-private partnerships are important. Even as our scientists develop, we have a library, as you said, an extensive trove of antiviral molecules to keep studying those molecules and testing them against new pathogens, because you never know, a molecule could seem unpromising at first, but then it could be something that saves lives further down the line. So we continue to, advance science and innovate and develop therapies that even now might not necessarily seem like they will be addressing this huge unmet need, but you just never know what's really coming up on the horizon as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna come back to you on this. You mentioned a few points that I think that, and Dennis as well, that we're going to have to explore a little bit, time permitting. And I just want to swing over to Jim and Mark. Please pay attention to this, because I think your thoughts will be invaluable. Jim, obviously, we're living in this era where the halo or the cloud over our heads is the pandemic. But the pandemic has brought out a lot of different issues that we're facing right now. Health disparities, racial disparities, nations that have, nations that do not have. We've seen all this conversation. Who has access to the vaccines? Who doesn't have access to the vaccines? Who has access to refrigeration? Who has access to medical care? And the Population Council has really been in the forefront of, and I could be wrong and feel free to correct, democratizing self-care, making self-care available to all people around the world. I imagine that there are policy challenges with that. And so you're on one hand, you're innovating, and you talked about some of the great innovations of history of the Population Council. You're innovating, but yet you've got to integrate into a system. And can you talk a little bit about the tension? Is the system supporting the effort? Or are you sort of saying we'll invent, and then if necessary, we'll lean into the system to make it work? Give us your advice.
Gil, that's a great question. And I think that Anu made a really critical point where she said it all starts off with what are the patient's needs and what are the unmet needs. I did a little research before this panel, and I looked in 1998, there was a RAND study that looked around the world and said that there are 150 million married women with an unmet need for a modern method of contraception. If you fast forward that to today, with all the advances we've had in contraception and access to contraception and so on, with all those advances, we have 172 million women around the world have an unmet need for a modern method of contraception. So while the percentage of people with an unmet need has gone down, the actual number has gone up. And so what that tells us is that even as good as the long-acting systems that we and some others have developed over the years have been, it's critical to develop new methods. Even here in the United States, 50% of all pregnancies are unintended. And while there are multiple reasons for that, our belief is that we do need more methods, newer methods, in order to close that gap of unmet need. And self-care is a big issue there. And self-care is particularly important when you have a circumstance in many countries that we work in around the world where the health system itself doesn't have the resources. There might be one MD for every 10,000 people in a country, right? They don't have the resources to have someone who's specialized and get the specialized training in how to insert or remove an IUD or something like that. Even if it's just a nurse or a physician's assistant can do it, they don't have those resources. So absolutely, to your point, Gil, we very much need, our products need to be sensitive to the context in which they're going in. The first thing is that where we start off in is we want every product, we want every individual, who can get pregnant to be able to determine whether and how many children she or they might have. That's the principle from where it starts. It's a voluntary, self-directed movement. But within that, and when you add all that up, you can see there are a lot of 172 million women around the world still with that unmet need. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to devise products to fill those gaps and those niches. And I'll just say one other thing that Anu said very well, and I think all of the panelists here know something about this. The public-private partnership part of it is really significant. We couldn't do what we do without the support of the US federal government, which has been a supporter, key foundations, the Population Council itself, and with our partners in the pharmaceutical industry. It takes the full wide swath of those in order to have these achievements.
That's a very critical point. We're going to be exploring that a little bit, Jim, this concept of the public-private partnership and setting up innovation for success. Mark, I want to swing over to you. Your company is involved in actually protecting, in many regards, our food supply. And I'm assuming that you're looking at this next generation therapy, not just for the use in humans, but the use in livestock as well. So is that correct?
No, we're focused on the human indications,
Okay,
the human
very
use.
good.
But
So
you're
let me-
right, moxidectin is an enormously heavily prescribed veterinary medicine as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to explore then the human side. You're dealing with diseases that really affect people all around the world. You're based in Australia. Can you speak a little bit in terms of what we've just heard about the concept of private-public partnerships? I imagine it's not just inventing new therapies and validating those therapies. It's also making sure that those therapies can sort of enter the system. But I want to ask a twist of the question, if you don't mind, and I know you'll be diplomatic about it. Can you share the challenges you've had, not in inventing, in ensuring access to innovation?
Yeah. How long have we got on the panel? Because this could take all day.
Well, I think we have a few moments. We want to ask a few other questions of all. You're experts and you're in the trenches. But tell us about the challenges.
It really is a massive challenge. The trouble with working in neglected tropical diseases, particularly, and you know, as a panel, I think we all understand what happens when you're trying to address health inequity, is that at the end of the day, most people can't pay, and so your job is to spend money, and to spend a lot of money with very little chance of anything ever coming back in. Certainly in our field, that's the case. It's all out for us. So when we have developed moxidectin and we have registered moxidectin, now we're going through a process of delivering a series of clinical trials as though we were about to go through a stringent regulatory authority, except this time it's for the World Health Organization, who also have a, excuse me, a process of reviewing products on behalf of a number of other regulatory authorities to help them to make decisions about whether or not they should be in their formularies. So, so there's beyond a stringent regulatory authority approval, FDA approval, we'd all be running around with our hands above our heads saying, well done us. It's now going to be out there and prescribed and we're going to make money. For us, that's a starting point. No money's coming in the door on the basis of that. We still have to spend money to do the pediatric work, to do bigger safety studies, to get through the World Health Organization before the endemic countries will accept the use of a drug. So it is, in terms of implementation, it's a long and expensive path. You know, we spend money on all of those activities, but we do have some great partnerships. That was the foundation of the question. And we work with a number of groups, obviously World Health Organization, TDR, we work with very closely. And I could list a vast number of people. I think this ability to pull in different collaborators and relationships, you know, our location here in Australia is if in any way a little bit of a barrier because of the time difference, but you can be anywhere. We work all over the world, and we really rely on those relationships, those partnerships to help us to deliver, to fill the gaps, the things that we're not good at, the things that we are good at, we focus on, and we bring in the skills that we need for gaps that we have. So it's a very collaborative and dynamic process that we have to manage.
You know, Mark, I think that your comment, each of you have mentioned partnership or coordination, collaboration. And I'm very struck by that word. I want to explore it with each of you for a moment because, you know, I think that people, not necessarily our attendees today at the webinar, but people out there assume that, you know, that each of your companies or enterprises do this in a vacuum. They don't realize you're working with countless professional groups, regulatory agencies, NGOs, in some cases, the United Nations, World Health Organization, Gavi, and many, many, many other organizations. It is a full court press collaborative effort. But before I do that, if the technical staff is listening in, they did send me a message. You can see my secret earpiece here, which is non-existent, but they sent me a message that the poll is now operational. And I don't want to deprive our audience of expressing their point of view. And if I could ask the team to put the poll up on the screen for a few moments, is that possible, Jonathan? Or not? then I'm going to assume that they're thinking it through. And up there it is, my goodness. There it is. I just have to say that our panelists, because you have sort of like insider knowledge, you can't participate, neither can I participate in the poll, but I ask our audience to take a moment and participate in the poll. We have many people listening in today. We'd love to get your point of view. This poll will be shared at the forum tomorrow and posted. So I don't want to influence you on my favorite answer, but no, you choose your own, please. We have 13 of our 31 people who have participated. It's going up. I ask everybody who's joining us today to please add the poll. We're trying to be as authoritative as possible and collect your answers. We'll wait one more moment, and then I want to get right back to our conversation. So please act right now. All right, Jonathan, I think I want to thank you and the staff for putting up the poll, and I want to return to our conversation. I think I can even share the results. All right, let's take down the poll and return to our panelists. So I would love to know, and I'm going to start again with Dennis and Anu, without disclosing like who and what, when you're sitting in conversation to move something forward in partnership, could you share with us what you think some of the biggest challenges you face externally in moving innovation forward? And the reason I ask is I often find that innovators have a very clear idea of what the unmet needs are. And then sometimes the system doesn't agree. And I've seen this in many cases in reimbursement systems, in government pay systems, where you invent something that is desperately needed. And yet the system that can compensate physicians or inventors for that innovation sort of shrugs its shoulders and says, I don't think it's so. Without mentioning names, please, share with us some of the questions you're asked in terms of creating an authoritative voice of why people who reimburse have to be partners in innovation.
Well, certainly, Gil, when we started to develop a smallpox antiviral, we were told initially by some of our federal partners, we don't need one. And then we were told as we progressed, well, we need some. And then eventually, we need quite a lot. And so I think part of this is an iterative education of your partners about what you're doing, why it's important. And as Anu mentioned previously, underpinning all this is just doing good science, developing drugs, having other drugs in the pipeline, and continuing to fight the good fight. And it really is a partnership. Everyone has to be on the same page. That takes time, that takes effort, that takes repeated conversations, and you just keep at it until everyone agrees. So, and one of the things I've always done, because I'm dealing with a lot of federal and global agencies, is remember and remind my team, it's our drug. We have to lead the charge, not let somebody else tell us how it should be done. And so I think you have to be your drug or your program's own best advocate.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Dennis. Anu, your thoughts about that?
Thanks, Gil. And I mean, really building on what Dennis said, it's like you really just have to keep fighting that fight. And for sometimes it's a disease area that is maybe a little bit more established, and sometimes you're really just building from scratch. But I think, that could create some fear, but I actually think once again, it's like, the hope and promise of science needs to drive your R&D investments. And so even when those challenges exist, once you're focused on the science and it's all about addressing unmet patient needs, I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but when that's your primary driver and that's like your cultural ethos, you're just going to keep pushing ahead. And sometimes it's going to be really challenging to build all these models from scratch, but many times you will leverage what you've built for other disease areas as well. And so I think, again, once at Gilead, the US innovation ecosystem enabled Gilead to really become this antiviral powerhouse. And over the last 3 decades, we've been able to do a lot with HIV, in viral hepatitis, and other infectious diseases. And so with that expertise came all these really strong relationships with academia and public health and NGOs and all these like multinational institutions, so that when COVID came, and even though we had to move very rapidly, we were able to leverage those partnerships and that network that had been built up in that field of virology. But clearly with new diseases and some of the other disease areas we're working on, it's extremely challenging and we will have to build from scratch. But I think that focus on the patient and the science will eventually get you there, even though it can be really challenging at times.
Thank you for that. No, I want to take both of your answers and give it a little twist for Jim. Now, we were talking about science, we were talking about partnership, we were talking about depth of knowledge. And Jim, I want to bring in a question for you specifically, which is the consumer, the person we're trying to help at the table. And often we're looking at this from the research standpoint and from the science standpoint and from the molecular standpoint and the safety and efficacy standpoint. How about the people standpoint? From your perspective at the Population Council, where does the voice of the person come into the development of the product?
Well, Gil, that's an extremely important point. And I would say that more and more over the years, the voices of individuals are playing a central role as we develop our products. Not just what indications and what to go after, but also what delivery systems might work for people. And some of the answers could be surprising. Right now, one of the products we have is in a trial, male contraceptive. It's a male contraceptive gel that the man applies to his shoulder and upper arms every single day. We think having men being involved in family planning decisions is essential. And there's a lot of skepticism out there about whether men will take the side effects, will they take the drugs and so on and so forth that would be needed for them to participate in family planning. And what we're finding in the trial, the results are not out and not public yet, but we're seeing terrific interest in this, lots of attention given to it from the media and so on. But most important, the men are really participating, they're using the product, and they're having a lot of success with it. It's the same issue we're going when we're thinking about our next generation of products, which are really multi-purpose prevention technologies. So contraception plus an indication for something like HSV or HPV or HIV or bacterial vaginosis or something like that. We went and conducted a global poll of women, a global survey of women, and asked them, well, what are the characteristics of products that you might want? And what we heard from them was that what people want they want more than one indication. While they're taking their contraception, they would love to get a second benefit with that product. And they would increasingly, they would like that to be under their control. So when they want to be able to use it and decide when they start using it and decide when they don't want to use it anymore. And so those are the kinds of things that are really important when you're doing product development in order to make sure you're really meeting the needs, not just the clinical needs, but the personal behavioral needs of the individuals. And we have a big behavioral research component of the Pop Council with offices in all around the world. We have 15 offices around the world that are focused on understanding what those needs are.
So let's hold that. These are some very important thoughts. Thank you, Jim. And Mark, I want to turn to you. You've heard from Dennis and Anu and Jim, and we've heard about the importance of science. We've heard about depth of knowledge. We've really gotten all of that sort of down and deep. And so I wanted to ask you your perspective of, from the pandemic's perspective, listening to them and looking at the environment we're in right now. I wanted to ask you about leadership. Where does leadership come from? does leadership come from individual companies? Does it come from governments? Does it come from public health officials? When we're looking at tackling, whether it's onchocerciasis, river blindness, or related disorders like that, whether it's dealing with, sort of like population choice, whether it's dealing with the threat of the next sort of like risk factor like smallpox, or dealing with the cascade of viral illnesses that our world faces. As more and more communication channels come in, what are you and your company doing to sort of bring together these voices and make sense of them so that your voice is clearly heard amongst this cacophony of noise?
It's really hard, Gil, to do that. It's, if you were to line up, one person who represented each of the 7 billion people on the planet, representing the different socioeconomic status or the different needs, and ask them to contribute, what should we be working on as a community of product developers? What is it that we should be doing? The answer would look very different to what we currently do. Our development pathway, and I think we talk a lot about R&D and commercialization as though they are a fluid single pathway. I think we are very good globally on R. I think we are, we have great groups who do D, but I'll come back to that. And on the far end of side, delivery, I think we have, again, some great partnerships and relationships and distribution networks. If I come back to the development side of things, I think as a global community, we're really weak on this. The skill in development, the standard, the rigor is in the hands of actually very few people. It's our industry, and it's something that we need to be extremely proud of, because we do science at a standard that nobody else achieves. It is the highest standards, and that's what we do. And I think we have to find a way to democratize that a bit better. Every time I worked with an academic group in the development setting, it's been a massive learning experience. And I think we're very poor at communicating what it takes to develop a medicine. The fact that we're all sitting here means that we've done it, and we understand what goes into that. But until we move that dialogue and open up a little more about exactly what's involved, there really should be an enormous amount of acknowledgement for developing a medicine. I mean, people use moonshot. Think about it, it really is pretty close to a moonshot. And so one of those problems that we've got is that our moonshot is incredibly expensive, which means that we gravitate to diseases where we're going to get our money back, which means that when we ask those people who are representing the whole of the world's community, which diseases should we work on the ones where we can get our cash back. And that's completely natural and normal in the environment we have. What I'm suggesting is that I think we do need to find better voices that tell us what is it that we should be working on. And I know that if I'd come and said 2 years ago, I want to work on a COVID vaccine, I think that would be a really good idea to have on the shelf, and Dennis has lived this, then you would never get the money. So we do need a better way of prioritizing ourselves. And I do think the area that we need to focus on democratizing a little better is the development side of things. That for me is one of the major gaps.
So I thank you for that. And you've touched on something, Mark, that I think, I hope our audience and all those that see this video will reflect on. Science in the lab and science expressed to society are two different things. And I'm wondering if one of the lessons one of the major themes that they wanted us to cover in the conversation, but we have a broader group of participants in the panel, so I went broader, is, are we prepared for the next pandemic? And I won't ask you that question. I will venture an answer, and I will say, no, we're not, because the issue isn't you. I think, Mark, to your point, and to Anu and Dennis and Jim, I have every confidence in science. I have less confidence in our ability to express science in a way that connects science to society. And I think that there's a gap there. So I wanted to explore very quickly and then leave you time for a final question in just a sentence or two. You said it well, Mark. You're here as finalist of Prix Galien because you've done something that is now available. You've changed people's lives through innovation, and congratulations and thank you for that. I wanted to ask you this, in terms of getting ready for the next pandemic, not that we're ready for the next pandemic. I don't think we're out of this pandemic, and I don't think we're doing particularly well yet, but our heart is in the right place. As scientists, as public policy leaders, I wanted to ask you in a sentence or two, if you were to give a prescriptive counsel to society, to decision makers, what do we need to do to incentivize science, R&D, to prepare for the next big global health challenge, be it a pandemic, be it the needs of the planet from a population control or a council standpoint? What's your counsel, Dennis? One thing you feel we need to get our heads together and do to make it better for the next round of challenge?
Learn from history. COVID has taught us all a very valuable lesson, and we should not forget it when the pandemic's over. We should harness the new science that makes vaccines, drugs, the new regulatory pathways, and apply them broadly to prepare for the next agent, whatever that might be. Don't forget.
Brilliant. Anu.
I think Dennis essentially said it. I think we all really need to come together and make the case that investments in public health approaches are worth it. We've learned a lot from this pandemic, as Dennis has said, and coming from COVID, we really should see it as an opportunity to actually become, in line with what Mark was saying, much more ambitious and bold as to our public health approaches and how we eliminate diseases like HIV, hepatitis, cancer, and a whole host of diseases that affect populations across the globe.
You don't get me started on that. Of course, I always find that our society has closed the barn door after the horse has escaped to the field. We have so many diseases that cost us so much more to manage, and yet, of course, I think in the United States, pharmaceutical products are about 18%. That's, by the way, folks watching the blue light, that is an antiviral light. It takes care of protecting Anu in her office, and we're glad that you're healthy and strong. But it's amazing how medicines are a small percentage of the overall cost of healthcare, and yet we focus extensively on the cost of medicines as opposed to the cost of sickness. I think it would be less expensive to tackle illness than to deal with treating it. Jim, what's your prescription? I mean, we're obviously not prepared now. What do we need to do to be better prepared for the coming health challenge?
Well, I definitely agree with what Dennis and Anu had to say. And what I'll add is a particular version of it is that this concept, we are all on one planet, and we are all very, very much affected by what happens to other people on our planet. I would prefer that everyone would look at places that are not as well off as in the United States and saying that providing assistance is the right thing to do. Therefore, let's invest in it and let's do it just for other people's benefit. But if that argument isn't enough for you, the argument is that what happens in Africa, what happens in Asia, what happens in Europe, South America, all around the world absolutely affects Australia, of course, absolutely affects us all. Even on island nations, of course, we've seen the COVID pandemic has come to it. It's been not possible to contain, but that's not just true of infectious diseases. That's also true of things like heart disease and cardiovascular diseases and things like that. For those people in those countries to thrive is good for all of us. People in the United States always overestimate the amount of money that we spend on overseas direct assistance, or ODA, and that is some of the most cost-effective money that the United States government spends, and could use quite a bit more.
Thank you for that, Mark. You really framed this question for me, and I want to thank you for that. So, you have an advantage also that you're calling in from outside the United States. That gives you sort of a pan-global view naturally because of where you're based. So let me ask you the same question, but from a globalist perspective. What does the world need to do to prepare and unite in preparation for the next coming health challenge?
I think the leadership of the United States in this is really critically important. You know, you have to accept that the United States is one of the world's great leaders in health and health questions, health issues. And for me, you know, while the World Health Organization is an imperfect model, it is, you know, I think it's better to get inside and change and improve than to stand on the outside and criticize. So, and I think that the World Health Organization is in a perfect place to really drive these agendas, and it does, but it's a very poorly funded organization relatively. So I think that investing in world health issues, identifying world health priorities, but I also think a better way, I've used the word democratizing too much, but I think, you know, to share the development issue, because let's go again, boil this down. I think research is good, delivery okay, development disaster, unless it's done by the pharmaceutical industry. And you know, there was a paper published in Nature from the FDA showing just how few of the clinical trials conducted in COVID have any value at all. And so people are running around out there believing in, with a faith-based approach, certain therapeutic interventions based on really crappy data. So I think we've got a lot to fix, but I think in investing in our current systems to help us to identify, I can't identify where the priority should be, but I know people who can, and we ought to help them to do that. And then we ought to not have to rely totally on the pharmaceutical industry to address all of our public health needs. That's not fair, and it needs to be better distributed so that the burden is shared out.
Thank you, Mark. These are key insights. You know, anybody listening to this conversation and writing down the key points is getting a handbook of what to do right and what to avoid. And I want to thank the four of you for that. Clearly, we have unfortunately, just a few moments left. I wish we had another hour, but I wanted to ask a very quick question about you and your companies. You know, you're here with Galien, and it's a symbolic of the fact that you're doing great science that's making a difference in millions of people's lives. In a word or two, what's the next big thing on your company's horizon? When we see you back at Galien for your next sort of nomination for a pre-Galien, why? Dennis, starting with you, what's the next big challenge you and the company are facing?
Well, there's a related virus, monkeypox, that's enlarging its infectiousness in Africa, and we are busy working to develop our drug to be used in that theater. So hopefully we'll be successful, and we'll be back to see you soon.
Thank you. Anu, what's the next big challenge that's on your desk? Obviously, blue light is important. It's developing. I know light has
the blue light, so I'll stick with pandemics and viral diseases. So I think, you know, it's really all about, again, I think pandemic preparedness, it's not if, it's when and what it'll be. And so I think, you know, really at Gilead, we continue to be very invested in that space of emerging viruses and trying to develop therapeutics, including through like strategic partnerships that will keep us very well placed to be able to respond to future and emerging viral threats.
Thank you. Jim, in just a few words, what's the next big thing on the horizon?
Well, I've mentioned multi-purpose prevention technologies. I've also mentioned male contraception. I hope both of those will come to fruition, but I'll also say something you might not expect, which is one of our drugs that we work with has shown in animals to have a very significant effect on remyelination, and therefore the potential to reverse the effects of multiple sclerosis. So we would love to be able to bring that to the market along with our other products.
Looking forward to hearing about that. Mark, a final word from you, and what's the next big thing on the horizon?
Well, it'll sit under the radar here, but delivery of moxidectin into the field so it has the impact. But we have a new molecule we licensed from Amgen for leprosy and TB that's our next big challenge.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. First of all, I want to acknowledge our time is concluded. It was an honor to be with each of you. I look forward to seeing many of you tomorrow at the Galien Forum and later on at the gala. I want to acknowledge you and your colleagues. I know that there are many people behind the scenes who you work with who are dedicated to your initiatives. Congratulations to the four of you, to your colleagues again, and good luck. I'm looking forward to seeing you again and again, championing innovation that will improve the human condition. To Bruno Cohen, our chair, I thank you. To the members of the staff, I thank you. Let's keep on doing great work that sustains people's lives. Take care, everybody. Good day.
Thank you, Gil.
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, Gil.
Thank you, Gil. Bye-bye.
Bye.